Welcome to Help Me, I'm Poor, the money podcast that's more Rodeo Drive than return on investment. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Claire, and each week we discuss how money shows up in our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary. If you enjoy the podcast, please make sure that you're following or subscribed wherever you get your podcast. It means that you'll get it delivered straight to the app as soon as a new episode is released. And frankly, it really helps us with numbers. We want to carry on making this and hopefully you want to carry on listening. You can also give us a rating and a lovely review if you want to be extra nice.
So this week, I am very excited. I feel like I'm excited a lot of the time. But in case you haven't yet worked it out, we are talking about one of the biggest films that Hollywood has released, one of the biggest rom-coms of all time, apparently, and that is Pretty Woman. And I don't even know where to start with this. It is such an epic, iconic film. I mean, it really blew up Julia Roberts' career.
Yeah.
And she is just so beautiful in it. Every time I watch it, I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so beautiful. But there's just so much to talk about when it comes to it. And I think, just to summarize the plot very briefly, we have our two main characters who are Edward, who is a very wealthy businessman, some questionable ethics we can get into about what he does to make all of his money, and Vivian, who is a escort. Well, she's hired as an escort, and I think it's really important actually just to give that context that this film was released in 1990. And one of the things that's been so interesting looking back and talking about this, thinking about this, is that in 1990, when this film was released, it was really seen as kind of like this really romantic story. It wasn't really considered to be problematic at all. And fast forward, 35 years now? And I think the view on it is a little bit different. I've been reading a few pieces around it that were written around the 30-year anniversary, the 25-year anniversary. And, times have changed a lot since 1990 in terms of what is acceptable, what we consider to be, I guess, permissible. And it's potentially a bit more problematic, I think, nowadays.
Yeah, and even the language has changed. So we would always, I think, whenever I was talking about this kind of work, use the term sex work, but the language throughout the film is those kind of slightly outdated terms.
Yeah.
And we see this in so many like films and TV shows from even just like 15 years ago, is that they will contain things that are considered to be like a slur now or language that we've moved on from. But I think, Julia Roberts has been asked about this in interviews and has said that she is not sure whether the film could be made now. And I kind of agree. I think that the closest example that I can think of is that film with Jennifer Lawrence a couple of years ago, which the name has completely escaped me, but she plays a woman again who's kind of in need of money, who is paid by the parents of a young man to seduce him because he needs to get laid in order to start his life for some inexplicable reason. But that was met with quite a lot of backlash, and that I think was a much like softer version of the story. But I was also reading that actually Pretty Woman was intended to be this quite like dark cautionary tale, but it ended up being really fluffed up into a rom-com. But I would say there are some still like some quite dark things that happen in the film. And I'm really interested to kind of get into it. But I also noticed on my rewatch that, as with so many of these things that we sort of thought might be fun to cover, you start watching it and you realize that money is like laced throughout the whole thing, right from the very first scene in this film.
Well, it's a transaction, isn't it? The first scene that we see. And I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was reading around this is that actually, when you zoom out, Edward's entire life, his entire being is transactional. And I think the romantic part of the film is really about trying to make him feel something real or something that isn't just a transaction. But even that whole relationship up until the very end that they have it's a transaction for him, and his work is a transaction, like his relationship's transactional. Like it really is very much about his kind of power that he has with money, because he can buy access to all of these nice things like the penthouse, like the shops, the cars that he doesn't even know how to drive the car, with the money that he has.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out that, as in so many of these narratives, he doesn't seem particularly happy in the beginning. You know, he's split up with his girlfriend. He's obviously a workaholic. His like sidekick is his lawyer,
Yeah.
Stucky, he's like a creep from the beginning, and obviously we'll go into it a bit more later, but there is an event that happens that means that he kind of finally like kicks him to the curb. But I think, as quite often happens, like he puts up with quite a lot of creepy behavior from him because he is someone who facilitates him making all of this money, and also is like a bit of a leech, kind of, it's shown later on. So yeah, it's posed as a rom-com, but there was an article about it that pointed out that it is a money story as much as anything else, and as happens in so many of these like films or TV shows, money is like a major driver of the plot. Like none of this would happen if Vivian had enough money to make rent in that first scene, or if Edward wasn't this super wealthy businessman. So I think it serves this function of like really driving the plot, but it's woven in so many interesting ways.
I think there's several things that I want to talk about, but let's start off with Rodeo Drive. And just to give the context for anybody that hasn't watched the film for a while, essentially what is happening is Whistle Stop Tour. Edward hires Vivian for $3,000 for the week. They agree. Remember, this is 1990.
I was going to say, it doesn't seem very much now, but
no, it is 1990. I don't know what that is now. A bit more. On the agreement that she'll stay, accompany him with his business deals and his meetings, and that he will also give her some money to go and buy some outfits so that she suits the look of being, I guess, a girlfriend or partner of a wealthy businessman.
Yeah, because all she's got with her is that like outfit that is etched onto the inside of my brain, like that, with the sort of white top that goes like in the middle, and
it's just so 90s
skirt, and the boots with the paper clip pulling them up, and she's colouring in the like patches with a black marker at the start. So yeah, you can kind of see why she might need some other outfits to be in the kind of company that they're going to be in.
And so he gives her this allowance, and off she goes to Rodeo Drive, like where all these designer shops are, super fancy, in the middle of Los Angeles. And she is very quickly met with, I guess, this real, like, what's the word?
Snobbery?
Yeah, it's snobbery. It's kind of looking down at her. There's almost disgust, and you can see on the faces of the shop assistants when she walks in, and they basically say, like, we don't have anything for you here.
Yeah, they won't serve her. And I think it's the first time that you see her be quite vulnerable, because she's this really tough cookie. She can she's like standing up to her more streetwise flatmate. She stands up to her flatmate's pimp. Like she doesn't seem to be that, like, she's very ballsy. And I think that's what's like appealing about her, isn't it? As like a heroine. But this is the first time we see her be vulnerable.
Yeah, and even when she first goes into the hotel with Edward at the start, then like she's really confident in who she is and in her outfit, and she's surrounded by all these posh people, and she's like playing up to it.
She's really teasing them. Yeah, she's like making them feel uncomfortable. And then this is like a real flip side of that, is that she is a real fish out of water, and she is made to feel like inferior by these awful women. She does get her own back.
She does
later on.
Yeah, but I think one thing it really made me think about is whether there actually has been this real shift since, I guess, 1990 and 35 years in also like what being wealthy looks like. And the reason I was thinking about this so much is that, again, back then, I guess typically people that had a lot of money and that would shop in designer stores were your kind of traditional wealthy people. So people from, I guess, upper classes or people that made a lot of money in corporate businesses. Whereas now, when I think of people that like have loads of money, I think of things like footballers.
Yeah.
And footballers are the prime example of like 20, 25-year-olds who are earning ridiculous amounts of money. And so they're the ones that like can afford to shop in these places, and they do, but they often choose to wear quite casual clothes. So they'll be wearing like Supreme hoodies or like Balenciaga hoodies, which are like £1,000, but it's still a hoodie. And it makes me just think a bit about like, I would love to see, you know, what does like a first class cabin look like? Or even, I mean, most of them go on private jets, but you see these pictures on their Instagram and they're on these private jets where 35 years ago, we would have seen people in like a suit and like their briefcase on these private jets. And now you see these guys in their 20s, like with their trackies on. And I think it's a real shift in maybe like the perception of what wealthy looks like now.
Yeah, just the aesthetic of wealth, I think, is far more diverse now, potentially, than it was. And because I think, you know, we've seen it sort of trending as well on TikTok. If you've got like quiet luxury versus loud luxury.
Yeah.
And I think that it is really interesting because again, you've got this thing of like money talks, wealth whispers. And I don't know if that's true anymore. I think there are people who are like wearing sort of their wealth on their sleeve in a like a more obvious way with like a lot of drip or you know and things that are, if you're in the know, they are like a status symbol. Like those Balenciaga trainers. Those are like things that are really distinctive, like fugly in my opinion, quite a lot of them. But you know, where if you're someone who's in the know, you can recognize that that is kind of like a wealth signifier. And I do think that I think that that potentially has changed. But I do still think that, like, I'm thinking of kind of exclusive boutiques, etc., in like London even, where I do think that if you rocked up in certain stuff, then you might be given like a bit of a side eye, maybe.
In a Vivian outfit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is true. I actually spoke as well to a personal stylist at an event a few weeks ago, and she has had an amazing career so far, and she works with a lot of footballers as well. And she was saying that they are the most fun clients because they don't have a budget. She often asks them, like, you know, what's your shopping budget? And they'll just be like, I don't have one. Like, just like find me some stuff that I like. And I think it's such a contrast to that very, I guess, traditional picture of style and wealth. And like you said, it's that like the quiet luxury, but it also makes me think of Pretty Little Thing, because, you know, they've done that big rebrand to try and be like that kind of like quiet luxury.
Yeah, and like we've grown up with, they've tried to like move with their, because obviously lots of their customers are now like in their 30s and 40s. They've tried to obviously like grow up with their customer, but it scans as boring to me, I have to say. Like, and I'm someone who dresses quite boringly.
Well, same. But I think what was also funny about that, it's like they're not an expensive brand, like they're a cheap brand trying to emulate this like luxury. And actually, some of the most expensive brands now are things that maybe look like from a distance like they are cheaper.
It's really interesting. And I think that the clothes are such a big part of this film. Like, some of the outfits that she wears are so stunning and iconic. Yeah. There are more flashy outfits, but the one I always remember is the like brown polka dot dress that she wears to the races.
Yes.
Just think that look has been like copied and rehashed so many times over the last 35 years, and it's still just so classic.
She just looks so good in it.
She does. She looks amazing.
But that brings me on to that scene actually where we see them at the polo, and Edward is there with some business associates, and Vivian is there looking wonderful, as she does. We see this really uncomfortable encounter because Stuckey finds out who Vivian is and what she does, and that she has effectively been hired by Edward. And he then tries to take advantage of that.
Yeah. And so Edward this is kind of building up to the like all is lost moment, the like climax of the film, because Edward has only disclosed that to Stuckey because he sees her talking to someone from one of the firms that Edward's firm is trying to acquire and dismantle. And he thinks that she is a corporate spy. And so Edward is kind of pushed almost to say to him, no, like, I know that she isn't, and this is why.
Yeah.
But then what follows is that Stuckey sort of propositions her in this really unpleasant way. And she obviously is really uncomfortable with the fact that he knows that about her. Their whole arrangement was based on the fact that, you know, there's this pretense and they're pretending to be a couple, or they're pretending that she's his companion for this week. And I think also they've both been falling into something that's more authentic than the transactional arrangement that they've had. They're like, he's opening up to her about things to do with like his father. Yeah. And she obviously, I think, is starting to feel safe. Yes. You know, you see that her lifestyle is really like precarious. Before, like, you know, her money is in a container in the back of the toilet cistern. Like, she never knows when her flatmate's going to take it to buy drugs. Like, you know, she's been in this really precarious situation. I think potentially she's starting to feel safe. And then this happens. And it leads to one of the other climactic parts of the film, which is where things go further and Stuckey attacks her in the hotel room and, you know, is very much about to assault her when Edward comes in, punches him, fires him, gets rid of him.
I think that scene really, pulls us back to, I guess, reality in a way, because the film has really romanticized, I guess, Vivian's job in a way, because for her, it is this almost Cinderella story. I mean, I've seen a lot of people saying that it is literally My Fair Lady in a modern 1990s storyline. And I think it's really easy up until that point to think like, oh yeah, this is all going really well, even though we get those glimpses, like you say, of what's going on with her flatmate and the fact that it is very precarious and stressful. And this brings us back to that, like, okay, this is really quite an unsafe, vulnerable job that she's doing. And yes, she's been fortunate in the film because Edward is actually quite a nice guy to her, but that's not the reality for a lot of people doing her job.
Yeah, and I think there's the fact that sort of we see right at the start, before she meets Edward, that when she's going out looking for Kit, like, there's been a body discovered. You can see that that environment doesn't feel very safe. But then I think this is a really stark reminder that even amongst all of these wealthy people who, like, in an environment that might seem like less seedy or whatever, she still isn't safe because of the job that she does. And I know that we're going to talk about like the safety around sex work a little bit later on, but I think I like the fact that the film includes that, because other than that, it is a fantasy, it is a fairy tale. It's got all of this fairy tale narrative woven in as well about you know, she talks about when she was young, and she's obviously had like quite a troubled upbringing, that she fantasized that like a white knight would come and rescue her, and that is kind of the story. You know, so I think it's good that we have those slightly grittier bits in there. It does give it the story more texture, I think.
Okay, I've got a quick question for you. When you picture somebody that invests, who do you picture?
Be honest, was it a man in a suit? A Jordan Belfort type? Navy gilet on his days off, maybe?
Exactly. And that's the issue that I want to talk about. Because for too long, the world of investing has felt like it's been built for people like them, not for women like us.
Which is why we're so excited that Help Me I'm Poor is partnering with eToro on their Loud Investing initiative. It's all about raising our voices and making sure that other women see that investing is for us too.
Loud Investing was born from a simple idea. If women don't see themselves in the investing space, then they're way less likely to feel like it's something that they should or can do.
Think about it. In finance films or shows, women are usually the wives, the secretaries, the girlfriends. The men are the ones making the big money moves.
And outside finance, we're often painted as the spenders, the ones who are racking up the credit card bills. Confessions of a shopaholic, anyone?
Exactly. But it's time to flip the script because women do invest and we're good at it.
So let's talk about it. Let's be loud about it. Let's show other women from all walks of life that you don't need a finance degree or a pinstripe suit to take control of your money.
Get behind the movement. Let's make investing more visible, more inclusive, and way less Navy gilet.
Thank you so much to eToro for being our partner on Help Me, I'm Poor. To find out more, head to the link in the show notes and join us in raising our voices and investing loudly.
And just a quick heads up, all content on Help Me I'm Poor is for information and educational purposes only. It should not be taken as investment or financial advice, personal recommendations, or an offer of any kind. Always do your own research.
eToro is a multi-asset investment platform. The value of your investments may go up or down. With investing, your capital is at risk.
I think it would be insane for us to have this conversation without talking about the changing face and the changing world of sex work. Because in the 35 years since Pretty Woman was released, there has been a huge shift in terms of what the landscape looks like. And I think the biggest shift being the online world. And we are now operating in a world where sex work looks very, very different. And I think there's so much to explore here. There is the real positive about it, but I think there are also still some kind of question marks about it. So I think the first real positive that we can see, like you mentioned there, is that there is now a legitimate way to do sex work with more safety.
Yeah, more physical safety, certainly. Like, I think obviously in online spaces, you are always like opening yourself. If you do anything online, you're opening yourself up and making yourself vulnerable to like things like trolling, etc. But in terms of the physical safety, the existence of platforms like Onlyfans does mean that you can be doing this work sort of remotely and making really good money without putting your like physicality in harm's way. But then it's almost sort of come a little bit full circle of now for OnlyFans, we're seeing kind of these like stunts where potentially the creators are then putting themselves back in harm's way. And obviously we're recording this just after the cancelled Bonnie Blue petting zoo that was supposed to take place on the 15th of June, which is Father's Day, but which was cancelled, in which she was going to put herself in a glass box, bound, and just invite people to do whatever they wanted to her, which feels like a very unsafe situation to put yourself in, even if people have a camera on them. I don't know if that phases people anymore.
No, I'm not sure it does. And I think that it is interesting because I've seen a lot of criticism from other OnlyFans creators of Bonnie Blue in particular, because of the fact that I think she is, like you say, almost taking it backwards to a place where they've worked quite hard to come away from, where sex work, isn't just about kind of having other people on screen with you. I was doing a lot of research around this and I came across a creator called Lucy Blanc, and I really like how she talks about both sides of the work that she does, and she really kind of gets into the pros and the cons of it. But she does say that she is a solo creator, so she is in the top 0.5% of earners on OnlyFans, but she does everything on her own. So she's filming videos, photos, etc., dressing up, responding to people's requests, but it is all just her that's in the content. So there is not that physical element of danger that we see. And then we have other creators like Bonnie Blue who are kind of going out there desperately trying to get this attention and really kind of pushing the boundaries, I would say, in terms of like I would say she's crossed the boundaries really in terms of what is acceptable, by the fact that it got banned and she's been chucked off the platform.
Yeah, she has been thrown off OnlyFans now, but I think, you know, there are several things that she has said, you know, like the fact that everyone, all men should like have open access to sex with other people outside of their marriage. That's the only way to have a happy marriage, apparently. But also she has just recorded a podcast with Andrew Tate. So I think that there is, you know, there is, I think, a legitimate concern about the way, you know, and it's always so nuanced, this conversation, because we want women to have agency over their own bodies. We don't want to feed into the stigmatization of sex work, but similarly, you know, there are these shifts that are happening, you know, the kind of divergence of young men's attitude towards things and young women's attitude towards things, and, you know, so much around like really frightening like rape culture and misogyny, and, you know, you just have to wonder how much things like open access to a woman's body is feeding into that. And I think that, you know, the general consensus from kind of victims, from charities, etc., around Bonnie Blue's stunt that was cancelled was that it was like a bad thing. It was like a regressive thing.
Yeah, I think, like you say, there are two, I guess, tracks and two considerations that this conversation is trying to balance, and that we're trying to figure out how to coexist. Because on one hand, I really think that there is this positivity about the fact that, you know, particularly with platforms like OnlyFans, it's giving women that agency. Women are going to be objectified, and it's allowing women to make money from that objectification that's going to happen anyway. So, you know, power to them in that respect. Like, if you want to put out that content, then why should anybody stop you making a lot of money? And actually, there are a lot of barriers for women when it comes to making huge amounts of money. So in that respect, I can see there's this real positive. Yet we also have this question mark about what is this access, like you say, particularly for young men and boys. It's just this like unbelievable amount of content of women being objectified, basically, whether it's women doing it out of their own choice or not. What is that doing to them? And like their, I guess, perception of women. And like you say, when we've got people like Andrew Tate who are seemingly still everywhere, it's so difficult to know how we can, I guess, have the two coexisting. How do we protect young men and help them to like respect women, especially in relationships, and also let women then put out this content and create whatever content they want that is sexual?
The money thing is really important, because I think that sort of, you know, as we see in the film, I mean, Vivian like works for herself, but
Yeah.
there is the suggestion that they could get more work if they were to work with someone who was like pimping them out. And I think that quite often in sex work, in porn, it's still been the men who've been making all of the money, and there has been a lot of exploitation. And I suppose OnlyFans is a way for that money to, you know, obviously there's a platform fee, but that money to go sort of directly into women's pockets. But it is still, yeah, it's just about how much it's still feeding into this misogynistic narrative and that like internalized misogyny that I think a lot of us have. And I do kind of take issue with the thing of, if I'm going to be objectified anyway, why I might as well make money from it. I hate the acceptance that you have to be objectified.
I just want to read out this quote that I read from Olivia Petter in The Independent when she was talking about OnlyFans, and I thought this was so well articulated. And she said, "Consider the fundamental ideology underpinning all this. Women have bodies that men will pay money to objectify. That is a systemic fact reliant on the exploitation and degradation of women that has existed for millennia. And any woman choosing to exploit that for personal gain isn't beating the system, but succumbing to it in the exact way men want her to. So even if that woman is making money from it, it's hard to see it as any kind of win, particularly not a feminist one.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a much better version of what I was trying to say. But I think there's also, we need to make the point that these figures that, these people that we're talking about, kind of Bonnie Blue, Lily Phillips, they are all very much the exceptions to the rule. So there are creators who are making a fortune on OnlyFans, and increasingly kind of celebrities moving into OnlyFans. They know they've got this ready-made audience. I think Lily Allen was talking about selling feet pics and how she was making more money from OnlyFans than from her music, and she had a great music career. But yeah, those are the exceptions, and in actual fact the average earnings from OnlyFans are much less.
So the average creator only earns less than $1,000 a year on OnlyFans, which we don't see in the headlines. The headlines that I saw when I was researching are about creators who are making 43 million in a year, like Sophie Rain, who, obviously that's going to get the headlines, but that is not what most people are experiencing. And I read an interview with Sophie Rain and some of the other creators in the Bop House, which is a whole other conversation. But one of the things that really stood out to me is that they, as Gen Z creators who are making millions from OnlyFans content, they said in this interview that it's not something that they really wanted young girls to aspire to. And that really stuck with me because in a way, you see the headlines, you see the figures, you see all the content that they're putting out, and they've admitted, they're having fun doing what they're doing. But at the same time, there's still this, I guess, discomfort that they have with what they're doing or with the perception and the idea that lots of other people might aspire to do that.
Yeah, and I think, Sophie Rain, her story is that, she grew up on food stamps. She's supporting her family now using what she earns, which is great. But also, I think that, that isn't a route out of poverty for absolutely everybody. And I think I was reading about a creator, I can't remember who it was now, who said that they used to do like income transparency reels about their OnlyFans and about kind of what they were making from TikTok, just from their sex work overall. But then they stopped because they were worried that it was like enticing young girls in to think that this was like a surefire way to make money and to make a lot of money. And they weren't comfortable with that anymore. And, but we see these income transparency reels across everything. It's not exclusive to OnlyFans or to sexualized content. It is across everything. There's so many, like, this is what I made in May as a content creator. Oh, and by the way, here's a course that I'm selling where you can learn how to do it as well. But the truth is that not everybody can rise to the top. Not everyone can be in that 1%. And there are it's conditional on certain things.
Yeah, there are always going to be those outliers. It's like, it's always been the case that you will get those exceptional stories and cases. But I feel like what has happened, especially with the rise of social media, is we've got this real, I guess, visibility and ability to sell people, I guess, a dream in a way that, 20, 30 years ago, you'd look at OK magazine and you'd see pictures of like, Victoria Beckham and David Beckham on their wedding and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I really want to be a footballer's wife. But you wouldn't really think that it was that likely to happen. And no one was selling you this like dream of like, oh, well, you just have to do what I've done and you can be a footballer's wife. Whereas now it's almost this proximity that we have through social media to these stories. And everyone, I think, and this is just a bigger comment on the state of the world and the state of the economy, but like people are desperate for easier ways to make more money. And it feels like this type of content is really tapping into that and pulling on that like desperation to make money in a quick easier, sustainable way without really disclosing that actually, A, it's not that easy. B, it's probably not going to happen for 99% of people. And C, like there's a lot of other factors, like you say, like privilege, like how you look, what your house looks like how much time you've got, whether you're supported by somebody else at home, all this stuff, which plays into whether you're actually able to make it or not.
If you look into some of the comments, you will see like, oh, I bought your course and I've been posting, but I've yet to get any like traction. Can you tell me what to do next? And quite often they're just met with like tumbleweed. But I mean, in terms of careers for kind of like Gen Alpha, influencer is increasingly coming up as like what people want to be when they grow up. Like my boys sometimes will talk about being a YouTuber in the same way that they talk about being a Premier League footballer. But I've also got a 2-year-old daughter, and as like liberally minded as I want to be, and as much as I support these women's choices, the idea that my daughter would be consuming that content and then aspiring to be an OnlyFans creator really makes me quite uncomfortable, apart from anything else, because I think that if you're being sucked into it because of the promises of huge amounts of cash, that's not like good for anything. But it does just come with all of these side orders that I think when you're young, maybe you don't think about the long lasting consequences of that.
Yeah, like once that content is on the internet, it's on the internet. And the creator I mentioned earlier, Lucy Blanc, she talks about this, and she is a journalist. She was a journalist and she does still do freelance work. And she said one of the big downsides is the fact that any future employer, if she wants to go back into employment, any future employer is going to look her up and that's what they're going to find. And that I find quite scary, because at the time, it might not seem like a big deal when you're putting out that content, when you're making that money. And yes, you know, if you're a Sophie Rain, you probably don't need to worry about it because she'll have enough money in the bank. But for most creators, most people that are in that middle ground that aren't making huge amounts of money, if you decide that you want to change course, where does that put you? When we have so much access to finding out about people online now, you can't just delete that phase of your life that easily if you then decide you want to.
Absolutely. And in actual fact, I actually had a contract last year where I had to confirm and like declare that I had never had an OnlyFans account or created OnlyFans content.
Wow.
It was literally a clause in a contract that I had for a project that I worked on last year. So, and that really, like, it was highlighted to me by my agent. She was like, I don't think you do, but like, no judgment. And I was like, it really highlighted to me the fact that it can, especially if you're not making that much money from it. You know, sometimes for some of these people, the trade-off is worth it. Because like you said, they might never have to work again, especially if they're smart with that money that they've made.
Yeah, if you're making like a couple of £100 on there a month, like that's something really worth considering. Like, is that going to get in the way of other opportunities? But I've never heard of that before. So I was about to say I'll look out, but I also don't create OnlyFans content, so I maybe don't need to look out. But
we've all made jokes about putting feet pics on there.
We have many times. But we could talk about this for days, and I'm sure it's a topic that we will come back to because there is just
definitely
so much to get into, and I would really love to be able to kind of explore it in more depth. But for now, thank you so much for listening. We really hope you have enjoyed the episode. If you have, then please subscribe, follow, rate, review, and also drop into our DMs. Let us know what you think.
Bye.
Bye.